I am preparing to go live now, so.
Yeah. Is that all what we will be?
Yes.
I can see we have Barry, but we don't have Malcolm Longley.
We don't need Malcolm Longley. He's not part of the committee. We should be live now.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Well, welcome to the virtual meeting of the Audit Committee of Northamptonshire County Council. This virtual meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Bill Jessup and I am the independent chair of the committee. So before we start, some important online housekeeping for everyone present. Please ensure any mobile phones around you are on silent. Please keep your microphone muted when not speaking and then unmute to speak. Only one person should speak at a time, and I, as chairman, will call those to speak and keep an eye on the room through my gallery view on those indicating they wish to speak. Before we move on to the agenda, I'd like to do a roll call of the councillors present to confirm attendance. Please indicate you are present when I say your name. Councillor Irving Smith.
Swift, Councillor Irving Swift, I'm present, thank you.
And I can see you are too. Councillor John McGee.
Present.
Councillor Steve Osborne.
Present.
Councillor Bill Parker.
Present.
And we've received apologies from Councillor Stephen Legg, so we're all here as expected. In terms of technical control of the meeting, if any councillor leaves the virtual meeting part way through for a period of time, I will continue the meeting unless we're not quorate, which is 3 councillors. If the meeting becomes unquorate, then it will continue as a briefing session for those members still present. No formal decisions or recommendations can or will be taken if the meeting is inquorate. Good, so let's move on to the agenda. We've had apologies from Stephen Legg, so the minutes can record that. Democratic Services, are there any notifications from members of the public that they wish to speak?
We have received none.
Thank you. And for members, any declarations of interest that need to be made at this moment?
Yes, Chairman, if I may. Item 9, I'm the Deputy Chair of the Northamptonshire Local Government Pension Scheme, and I don't know if I need to leave the meeting when that's being talked about.
Actually, when we get to that point, I think we very much value your presence, Bill.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I did put it in an email, but I do have to leave at 11 o'clock for work commitments.
Okay. Right. Well, let's press on as fast as we can. Are there any? No, it's all right. Let's just press on as fast as we can and see where we get to. On Chairman's announcements, just one to make in respect of 2 people who've been great servants of the committee. As we know, Susan Zeiss and Barbara Gale are both moving on to pastures new. Personally, they've both been fantastic helps to me as a complete amateur in matters of local government. So I've very much appreciated their help, and I think they've also been valuable servants of the committee. So I would personally like to wish them the very best for their futures and suggest that the minutes record the committee's thanks for everything that they have done for us.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Good. So that moves us on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Any comments on the minutes, or can we approve those? Cecile?
Sorry, I was, where is that? Where are they? The minutes. Sorry. Now, if I am too long. They spoke about what we discussed about the pension last time. And I don't recall, maybe because we were on Zoom, but I don't recall that we had so much information about the amount, about the pension. So is that in page 7? I don't recall it was in such precise details, but maybe I was sleeping at the same time, I don't know. But it seems very precise, and I don't recall having all those information. but I didn't watch again the thing. So
Yeah.
the minutes, sometime I could not, it's a long time ago, but I was a bit hesitant to sign those minutes because I didn't remember what was said at that point, but maybe I'm the only one.
I think you mentioned it to me the other day, and I did a bit of research. I think it was commentary from E&Y that referred to those specific figures. And Barbara, presumably you're confident with the notes that you took at the time?
I am, yes.
Perfect. Are you content then, Cecile?
Yes, well, it must have been said very quickly and we didn't pick it up, but sorry, Barbara.
That's fine. I believe Debbie, who presented the information, did speak rather quickly, so we did have to go back and get some of the information to make sure we'd got it recorded accurately from watching the YouTube broadcast of it. So that's why that's quite detailed, to make sure we've recorded all of the information as correctly as possible.
So can I have a request for today, that when numbers are said or whatever, we said it quite clearly so we can remember, because that I didn't put on my note and I couldn't. It passed me by. Thank you.
Okay. So subject to that, Barbara, would you just like to run a roll call on the approval of
join the meeting?
Yeah. A roll call for the minutes. Sorry, bear with me just a second, find the right spot on my note. Yeah, can Councillor Irvin Swift indicate whether you approve or not the minutes? Perfect, thank you. That was a thumbs up. Councillor John McGee?
Approve.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Osborne?
Approve.
Thank you. And lastly, Councillor Bill Parker?
Approve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we now move on to the main agenda, and I'm just going to take the first two items in reverse order, because I'd like to start with the update on the risk register, because the risk register obviously is the foundation for more or less everything that we do on the audit committee. And before I ask Duncan to speak to this, I'd just like to make a couple of points. First of all, I guess I was slightly surprised that the risk scores were unchanged, because I'd anticipated, for example, in relation to the financial risk, that as we move towards the end of the council's life, the risk would come down from 25, and in fact all of the scores are the same as they were last time. So maybe you'd like to comment on that. The other thing is, I think the report probably doesn't give sufficient flavour of how much has changed within the detail of the risk report, because the documents kind of look the same as last time and the scores are all the same. So I think the committee might be forgiven if they thought that actually the risk register hadn't changed very much. Actually, if you compare this version to the previous version, which I did for an hour yesterday afternoon, there is actually a lot of change in the detail, and particularly in the action plans to mitigate risk, which actually should give us quite a lot of assurance that the risk register is in fact a dynamic document which is being used in the management of the organisation. But if when you comment, Duncan, if you could help the committee by giving us rather more flavour of where the risk register is changing. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd introduce this item, I think, fully supporting the Chair's comments, that I think this is a good assurance into the committee that the risks across the council are being regularly reviewed by risk owners. That process also includes the review of all of the data that you've had in front of you by the leadership team. So not only do the risk owners review and update the detail within each of the individual risks, but NLT then take a helicopter view of the entire risk register, and there is a good and constructive conversation that occurs at leadership team. And it's often one of the pressures on my service and some of the support around risk, that we then have a very tight timescale in order to reflect some of those changes that are normally not that significant, but to reflect some of those changes so that we give the committee the most up-to-date version of the risk register. So it is very much a dynamic document, and that should give the committee the reassurance that risk is being regularly reviewed, kept under review, and reflecting the current environment at the point at which those risks are kept under oversight. It is particularly difficult, I have to say. I do agree with the Chair's sentiment that I think this report would benefit from a more detailed summary of where the significant changes are within individual risks. I do agree with that sentiment, and we will try and do that next time. It's been extremely difficult to do that in this cycle of the risk review, because what we were actually trying to achieve in reporting this item to you to this meeting was to really balance the two tensions that the council faces in regard, demonstrating to the committee that the Northants leadership team continue to review and update their risks, that the risk register remains a dynamic and live document, but also respecting the fact that the council is still within a significant period of pressure around responding to the COVID-19 issues. It's perhaps timely that this week we've seen national announcements that those pressures still exist across the country. So we've been trying to balance the fact of a lighter touch around the risk process, of giving the committee the assurance and visibility that risks remain under review, and the risk register is attached to demonstrate the evidence around that to you, whilst also not, I'm afraid, to be honest with you, applying the full risk cycle that we were applying 12 months ago around more detailed auditing of this information and more detailed reporting to you around change control of what are the emerging risks, how have significant issues of risks changed. So I would ask for the committee's indulgence, I think, on this cycle for understanding that I'm not really going to be able to talk about significant changes to the risk register. I can only undertake to try and do that for the next cycle of reporting into the committee to show that. I think in commentary around the scores saying the same, I think the general principle, as the Chair has outlined, I agree with. I think in some of these areas of risk, I would like to highlight the local government review as one of those areas of risk. I would expect to see some of the scores falling as we move towards March. I think both, coming back to the earlier point, that would be a change that we would be commenting on specifically to the committee to highlight what's the evidential basis, where's the confidence coming from that that score is falling as we would want to see it falling, where the risks are being managed towards delivery of future Northants. But there are other risks in there that I would not necessarily expect to see reduce all the way up to the end of NCC. And finance is perhaps one of those where I think until we actually arrive at March the 31st, I think a lot of the risks around the finances of the council remain valid around service pressures, unexpected costs, effective budget management. And those kind of issues, they remain very live risks that I would expect Barry to be paying a lot of attention to right up to March the 31st. And indeed, perhaps IT is a good example of that, where we will see the management of risks may actually fluctuate. They may go up before they go down as we move towards March the 31st, as there is a good amount of work still needing to be done to take us to a place for NCC risks around providing a stable basis to move towards a safe and legal transition to future Northants. So this report is really submitted as a summary, a high-level view, to give the committee the assurance that the register itself and the risks within the register are being regularly updated. Of course, I can try and answer questions around any specific text or issue that is within that document. I may need, and I normally give this caveat on the risk register, I may need to take that question away and actually have a conversation with the risk owner, because of course I'm not the risk owner for these risks. So I do have what I think is a reasonable knowledge of the basis for the issues contained within it, but that may not be sufficient to answer some specific questions, but more than happy to take them back to the risk owner and come back to the committee. I think I'd finally just like to highlight that I think on the agenda papers, I think I may have inadvertently confused some of the committee. I think there is 2 links to the same corporate risk register. So I think Appendix A it has 2 links to it. They're both identical, except the lower link, if you click on it, has some formatting issues where it spreads across a horizontal column. It doesn't all appear on the same page. But there is no difference, certainly not that I could see, between those 2 documents. So apologies if providing 2 separate links to the same document, slightly misformatted, has caused any problems. I'd apologise to the committee for that. I pause at that point and accept any questions.
Okay, so John, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to labour on this because we do understand there has been difficulties given the COVID situation, which indeed would affect staff and everything else. But as the Chair says, to see no or very little difference on the risk register, given the cost of COVID to the present day and in the future going on to the unitaries, I would have thought that there would have been some movement up or down. And I don't believe it's realistic not to have seen some of that in the risk register.
Cecile?
Yes, I will echo John's comment, but for me, when I read the risk register and I went to other councils who have, the trouble is you have some risk and you have some few things you cannot do anything about it. So they are not a risk anymore. You have to live with it. It's nothing you can do. You cannot mitigate. So you have on your risk register thing you can mitigate against. The things you cannot mitigate against are not a risk anymore. They are a given. But where I am very surprised is the way it has been done. For example, one, it's one did at the top specifies COVID-19. Yes, which one absolutely said due to COVID-19. Now I had it. Sorry, I will say, but I will go. For example, for the council finance are not sustainable. And little things, it's when you look in the granular details, likelihood factor, 5, a general election. We know that is not a likelihood factor. Now we have a fixed parliament. We have an election, the general election is going to be in 4.5 years because it's in the gift of the prime minister to give a general election. So you have, when you start to read about what has been thrown at the risk register, you question if we have valued the risk rightly. And also, I will echo what the chairman said, a risk register, you have a target score, and it's a current score, the target score, nothing has moved, and we are still where we are. But I do think that some, as John said, have included COVID-19, and it's risk number 8, now I find it. Local government reorganization not successful in light of delay caused by COVID-19. Well, everything is not going to be successful in light of COVID-19. So what I find is it's more than a document. It's a dynamic document, but it's a dynamic document that is not of the same equality of quality, and that is what I find very disturbing. I have looked at others, as I say, risk register, and there are much. The thing is, for me, when a risk register becomes too complicated, nobody take any notice of the risk register. And frankly, I think ours is far too complicated for you, Duncan, especially. It's not easy. And also, maybe could we ask later to our auditors, because that is not helping the auditors either. When they see all those risks, it's much more difficult for them, if they have questions, to be able to give us an audit quickly and speedily. So maybe later on, Chairman, if you wouldn't mind, to ask the auditor what they think of the risk register, it might be useful for us. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Any other comments?
Yes, Chairman, I had got my hand up, but can I just say, it's a very simple question. On the first page, number 7, it talks about stranded costs generated by the creation of the Children's Trust. What does stranded costs mean?
Barry, would you like to answer that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So these are costs that the council would have to absorb as fixed costs when the trust was passed over. So, for example, there will be building costs if the trust moves out into a separate property, which will eventually happen, and the council will be left with the cost of a building where previously it would have been allocated to the trust, and that's just one example.
But I suppose the quantum of that will depend on your continued negotiations with the trust and where you finish up prior to 1st of November.
That's correct, but it's about the future as well in terms of, the trust will be taking a significant proportion of the council's budget and will have operational independence over that budget. So again, another example on support services. We will be putting a service level agreement in place for support services, but in the future the trust might use a different provider on that. Obviously TUPE would kick in, but the risk is that they will have a significant proportion, around about 25% of the council's budget.
Yeah, actually, that sort of raises an interesting point that we just need to be aware of as we move towards the end of Northamptonshire County Council, because some of those risks are not ours to worry about. There will indeed be risks for the new unitaries, but I'm assuming that that probably Duncan or somebody else, in parallel with the work that we're doing, is beginning to assemble risk registers for the 2 new unitaries. And from our perspective, we just have to be mindful that actually, we have to worry about things until the end of March. From the 1st of April next year, it's actually somebody else's issue.
Could I come in on the border risk register as well, please?
Yes, of course, yeah. And then, Cecile, I spotted you.
Yeah, so in terms of COVID-19, COVID-19 is not a risk in of itself. It is a trigger for most of the other risks. So if you look through the risk register, you will see, as Councillor Irving-Swift said, there is a reference to COVID-19 specifically on finance. But in some of the other risk registers, it had already been predicted. So a pandemic on risk number 4 had already been identified as a risk. For example, critical incident not managed effectively. And on statutory duties to residents, there's unexpected large-scale emergency event impacting population health and well-being. And if you look at the action plans on that, there are specific COVID action plans as well. So it's not that COVID hasn't been analysed and updated on the risk register. And some of these risks, and I accept what Councillor Irving-Swift says about general elections, but to my count, we've had 3 since 2016, so I'm not going to write out another general election potentially because of the 5-year fixed term Parliament Act, because recent history has shown otherwise.
Cecilia, you wanted to make a comment?
Yes, for me, it would be our risk register is far too pernickety, and we somehow when you put bullet points, they are not all the same. And for example, at one point, with relation with the staff, and one is to retain staff and so on. And one of the risk is something like unsupportive trade union and so on. So I find we manage risk and and management together. It's not the same. But what I would like, if it's possible, and maybe for the unitary, because we are at the end of our life here, if when we have the risk, we have an highlight of the risk that are the most important for the council. I know we have 25%, 15%, 20%, but you have some risk. And for me, the risk that build everything is the finance at the moment, because if you had good finance, the risk may be better managed. So if Duncan, when he presents a risk register, can put the 3 major risks. So with amongst all our risk, if we could go down to the 3 that are the most, what make people not sleep at night, what are those 3 and how they mitigate at the best, that will be helpful for us. So we will not have to be too pernickety. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask you a question in a minute, Duncan, as to how our registers, just out of interest, don't labour it, compares to others that you're involved in. But just my perspective on this risk management is that actually it's probably not too helpful for us as a committee to get down into granular detail about individual triggers, nor necessarily to get down into the bowels of the process. What I find much more reassuring is the fact that, particularly if you compare where we were 2 or 3 years ago, from this conversation, you can see that management do take risk into account. They do report it. It gets talked about. It actually gets talked about at the council because we're a subcommittee of the council. So I'm encouraged by all of that. And I try and restrain myself from nitpicking over detail. But Duncan, just to give Cecile some comfort, how would you, I don't know, you're kind of biased because you've done it, but how would you rate this sort of process compared to other councils?
I'd like to think I'm not biased on this, actually, because it's something we do as an audit team that isn't an audit function. It's supporting the risk process, and we do it because, well, for a very pragmatic reason, an awful lot of councils can't afford to have a dedicated risk team. So there is just a practical issue of someone needs to do something on risk, and it sits quite nicely alongside an audit role. I think the second reason we do it is very much that it does sit alongside the audit role, and it's very useful for us as an audit team to be involved in discussions when people are considering the risks, and be at least in the room when risk owners and leadership teams are thinking about their top 3 risks. So it is, you know, there's some good benefit for my team. I don't do it out of the goodness of my heart, but similarly, I'm very agnostic about how a council wants to run a risk management process. The one thing I'm not really negotiable on is, like all auditors, we look for the council to maintain a risk register to inform our audit work. How they do it, how bureaucratic that is, how simple that is, I really am agnostic about. Some councils do it through Excel as a spreadsheet process, a very simplistic process. My experience of councils that do it that way, it actually becomes a very bureaucratic process, and change control becomes very difficult to collate that information effectively. And you start having a large burden on admin officers to maintain that information and maintain it accurately and up to date. There's very few software packages out there that do this work. I'm aware of Grace, obviously, that's what NCC uses. I'm also aware of something called InPhase. They're largely database systems. They largely do work like an Excel spreadsheet with just a front interface that allows action tracking and change control, and some access control where you allocate people as risk owners. Where we do guide our clients, it is around, I would reassure Councillor Irving very much that when we're talking to risk owners about assessing their risks, we constantly talk to them about, really, top 3. What are your top 3 triggers in this area? What are the top 3 consequences in this area? What are the top 2 or 3 controls that are managing these risks? What's the one or two actions you really need to take that's going to mitigate your risks? So getting round to really your question as to how do you compare, I think back to very much basics. We talk to chief executives around really a corporate risk register might have 3 to 6 risks. More than that, you know, we kind of apply a maximum of a dozen. If you think you've got more than 12 really important risks, we're not sure. And we have a starting point of 3 to 6. So Northants actually, its current register is running at 11. So to go back to Councillor Irving's point about the top 3 risks, I'd rephrase it that leadership team have defined that they have 11 top risks that they want to have an awareness of at leadership team. And within that, leadership team and the risk owners feel that the triggers, you know, in some cases, I think there's 14 triggers listed, you know, that they want to highlight that those are 14 issues that they feel significantly influence their management of those risks. So in that respect, I think I might be tempted to agree with Councillor Irving that there is too much detail, perhaps in comparison to other risk registers. But then, because I'm agnostic about it, if that's the level of detail the risk owner feels is best included to both manage the risk and to show their management of the risk, then I'm truly agnostic that that's for them to feel that that's the best way for them to manage that risk. And I do feel that sometimes risk owners might get tempted to feel that they've got to demonstrate they're managing every single level of detail within a risk. And that's really one of the advices I would give to this committee, that is a dangerous perception. If the committee gets into the weeds of this detail, you will create a culture amongst risk owners that they've got to document every single potential threat that they are trying to manage to demonstrate their risk managing, rather than just focusing on the very important ones. So to sum all of that up, I would say under the future Northants, I'm not 100% sure, but I think the work stream is coming to me in order to collate the different risk information across all of the councils, and as a first instance, present that range of approaches from the different councils into the new chief exec, the new 151 and monitoring officers, and invite a conversation with them about how do they want their risk process to work. And part of that will be NCC's risk register, going across to them and saying, this is run on Grace, here's how it works. I think it's East Northants who use InPhase, and I'll be doing the same. I'll be looking at their risk register and how does InPhase work and presenting that to the new management team, and to have a conversation of how do we want the risk register for future Northants to start working. And that is a heavy piece of work, I suspect, coming in my direction over the next 6 months.
Which of course is actually nothing to do with us. Barry, you want to make a point?
It's just a point, Chair, about the council's risk profile and why comparing this to other councils will probably produce a different result to what you expect. Because I talked to colleagues up and down the land through Society County Treasurers and other groups, and most councils have shifted their risk triggers as a result of COVID-19 and are facing increased operational and financial risks as a result of the pandemic. We often need to remind ourselves that, as well as that, we're under 2 separate sets of government directions and being mandated to do LGR and implement a children's trust in the middle of the pandemic as well, which means that we've got a very different risk profile to most other councils.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, absolutely.
If I could add to that, Chair, sorry to interject. I think Barry's summed up my 5-minute speech in a much more succinct way. I would look at this risk register and think I can't see any fault in its assessment of the unique risks that NCC are currently managing, and it's very focused on that environment. So I'd be supportive of all of Barry's comments there.
Yeah, good. So I think we've had a reasonably good debate on that. Duncan, when would you next routinely come back to the committee on the risk register?
I would cast a request across to Barbel at this point. We normally bring this back quarterly, and I'm not sure when the next audit committee fitting a quarterly cycle would be for that off the top of my head, so apologies. I'd defer that to Barbel as to when the next likely suitable meeting might be for that.
I guess the next meeting is actually November. We'll talk about it later, we may need to pencil in a date for December. So, and then I think we've got one in January. I think my only point is that there's no point coming back to us in March because it'll all be done by then. So I think we ought to have some update. I'll leave it to you and probably Barry and the management team to decide whether a representation of what you've done today is the appropriate best method of keeping us informed, or whether there's a sort of more overarching description you can do which might be more appropriate. Cecile, I think you want to make a point.
Yes, as a point you made at the beginning, Bill, we have the risk register, we have the level of risk, and the biggest level is 25. And so the problem we have is that we don't see the mitigation are working, because we have a target and we still stay at our higher. So maybe when you present, please, if it's possible, Duncan, to see on the risk register what are the risks where the mitigation have worked, because if you have a risk register, is you have put mitigation, and if the mitigation work, your risk register fall down, and some risk disappear. They are not static. So next time, for me, what will be useful is how dynamic the risk register was or is, and what mitigation have worked. And so therefore we should have our target score getting rich, because it's no point to have a target. You know, it's like if I am, the doctor say you lose weight, and every day I go on the scale and I put the same weight. So I record my weight, but I haven't done anything for it, because it's just a recording. So for me, how we could have highlighted how successful our mitigation on the risk register have been, that would be more useful for me as a member of the audit, if is that possible. Thank you.
Chair, I think what I'd respond to Councillor Irvine on that is I'm more than happy to have a conversation with Barry and indeed Teresa around trying to bring something back to the November or December meeting. I think my instant response would be from Councillor Irvine's earlier comment about focusing on the top 2 or 3 risks. I don't think I could guarantee that I come back with some detailed information on 3 big risks with some big analysis done on it, but I could certainly look at 1 or 2 of the highest scoring risks from the 11 and try and come back in November or December with some more detail around unpacking what that high score means and what the mitigations are and how effective they are, either in maintaining the score as it is, which can actually be a very successful form of risk management in just keeping the score as it is, or why the target score is not being achieved yet, or any of those. So I can try and unpack 1 or 2 of those in detail, but I'd like to caveat that with, I think I need to have a discussion with Barry, because my first point around balancing that work with distracting the staff involved in those areas from COVID pressures, it is still a live issue that we've got to have regard to. We're still not back to business as usual. So I can't guarantee it, but I can certainly promise that we will try and do something along those lines. And I'll work with Barry to see how best we can do that.
Yeah, I'm totally sympathetic to the observations you've just made. And I would sort of urge you to keep it at a reasonably high level, so that you don't take too much of people's time away from what they should be doing in terms of the day job and the night job as well. So I think we had a good debate on that.
Yeah, I have had my hand up for the last.
Sorry, John. Yeah, come on, John. Your turn.
Very quickly, Chair, because I know you want to move on. I've got to go at 11, but the next meeting is November, and I just want it noted, one of the biggest risks for the timescale and during this disastrous COVID situation is the Children's Trust. And by the time we get to the next meeting, it'll be too late to do anything about that. and we don't have enough scrutiny at county to actually look at that too.
Barry, I think that's an excellent point. Do you want to say something specifically around the Children's Trust before we move off this? Because I think you're in many ways one of the sort of point men in terms of negotiating the relationships between NCC and the Trust for the final part of the year.
That's correct, Chair, and there is a specific scrutiny being arranged in second week in October to allow scrutiny to examine the contract for the Children's Trust. In terms of the risk, we're managing the risk through the risk registers, not just the strategic risk register, but obviously all of the project risk registers. And it cannot be described as anything else but a high risk project. Obviously, we have ERP implications for financial systems, we have duty implications, but all of that's well underway and is being managed at strategic and operational board level, as well as the contract negotiations that I'm involved in. However, it is a bit binary. It'll either happen on the 1st of November or it won't happen on the 1st of November. But there aren't many other options, or as Teresa would say, and if any model of car you want, as long as it's black, it will be 1st of November or not 1st of November.
Good. Okay. If we could move on to that point, so we need to.
Sorry, Chair, can I just interrupt on that point where he says it will or it won't happen on the 1st of November? If it doesn't happen on the 1st of November, does that mean that they won't be going ahead with it? Well,
we can't not go ahead with it because it's clearly a statutory direction from a Secretary of State. It's what that plan B is and how we can do that without jeopardising local government reorganisation at the same time. That would become the issue. But at the moment, like I say, all of the project plans are green lighted, and we're very confident that it will go live on 1st November.
Good. So, Barbara, would you like to just do the roll call to make sure we're content to note that report?
I will. Councillor Irvine-Swift?
Yes, and thank you, Chairman, to allow me to speak so long. Thank you.
And Councillor John McGee?
Agreed.
Councillor Steve Osborne?
Agreed.
And Councillor Bill Parker?
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Good. So we'll now move back on the agenda to the internal update. So Duncan, it's you again, and so over to you. And I guess you'll bring members of your team in as you wish during the presentation.
It's actually Jacinta who'll present it all for us.
Okay.
I'll still stay on the meeting, but Jacinta and Steve will deal with these items.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Duncan. In terms of the update, I would just like committee to firstly note that the update has been incorporated into the plan report, really just to emphasise the continuing theme of it having to be dynamic and to reflect the ongoing changes that the plan is subject to, with this being the final.
I have a very bad sound. Do we all have a bad sound? I cannot hear Jacinda very well.
No,
Can you hear
I've
me
got
any
good,
better?
I can hear fine.
My sound's fine.
Yeah. So it seems like just you, Cecile.
Right.
So carry on, Jacinta, and we'll.
Yeah, I was going to say, normally we would have these as two separate plans. There would be a plan report and there'll be an update report, but we've merged them together. If I can direct committee to section 4 on page 21, which details most of the sort of changes and the update. And just to clarify, at 4.2, members to know that we have been in discussions with the chief exec of the Children's Trust, and we've done some liaising with the then Children's Services Director, who has now been appointed Children's Trust Director. And the plan does show that we have several reviews included, giving assurance on sort of the handover and also arrangements for monitoring service delivery by the Children's Trust. I would also just highlight to committee at 4.3 that plan work was suspended and the resources were refocused on providing assurance over operation of controls on expenditure during the lockdown period. And this is consistent with the information that we did provide to all the partners. And the work that we undertook is as detailed from 4.1 to 4.7, I think. Yeah. Moving on to progress work at 4.8, I've recorded sort of areas where assurance work has been undertaken during the last 5 months. As that shows, we have been doing some plan work. It is noteworthy, though, that none of the work are key financial audits at the moment. But this is sort of by design. We would normally undertake these second half of the year in order to ensure that we have sufficient coverage of the work. We are planning to start these middle of Q3 and beginning of Q4, hopefully. Briefly, Table 1B gives us a narrative of sort of planned performance and some statistics as at the end of August, which is showing that as at the end of August, we had more or less started 42% of the audits that were on the plan at the time. And that includes obviously brought forward audits from 2019-20, which does form part of the 2021 plan of work. If we move to Table 2, this summarizes sort of plan areas and the work we're proposing to do in the remaining 7 months of the financial year. We are showing 904 days, and we believe this is sufficient to enable an audit opinion to be provided. So it gives us all the different areas that we're looking to audit in order to get an opinion. In terms of the opinion, the direction of travel has been positive. 18-19, the opinion that was noted in the annual governance statement was limited. 19-20, based on work that we've done, we are moving to a satisfactory, so that is a positive in a way. And at 4.9, we are also let me see, 4.9, yep. In line with our processes, we are also reporting some limited assurance reports that we've completed since the last committee. And Steve Mangan will take us through that later when I finish my piece. If I move to 4.1, we put a comment in on the follow-ups where we have been doing some work on following up on implementation of recommendations. I haven't detailed the findings in the report because I assumed, obviously incorrectly, that the action tracker was an agenda item, and it's not an agenda item for this committee, but hopefully it will be reported at the next committee. But as reported there, again, there's been good progress in terms of implementing recommendations, given all the pressures that officers have been under with trying to deliver COVID. Right, if I take committee to 4.18, where we're detailing changes to the plan. In relation to close down activities, we are in dialogue with NCC management team to get an understanding of what the audit role is in terms of how we review the work of the Future North Hants project teams. As I've said there is a view that the work that they're doing is subject to quite a bit of scrutiny. And we are aware that there is sort of a governance framework of various boards that the work gets reported to. So our understanding from looking at one of the work stream, the ERP work stream, there's a project group who reports into a project board. And that project board then flows into a bigger program board, which has a wider remit. And all of the information flows into the unitary shadow boards on a monthly basis. And we have established, or we understand, that these boards do have representation from all the relevant stakeholders. So, as I say, following on from the discussion, we have scaled back on the close down reviews that we had initially put in the plan. Subject, obviously, to discussions with management, we might look to bring some back in or leave it as is.
Could I just
having taken those,
may I just interrupt you for a minute because you know, as I said at the beginning, we just need to be aware, and I'm very sympathetic to the distinction between NCC and the new unitaries, and we already have the shadow authorities running in parallel. I kind of look at this almost as a closing balance sheet, opening balance sheet issue. So anything that would be in the closing balance sheet, we have an interest in. Anything that's in the opening balance sheet, we don't. And actually, if you'd call these close down, actually, if you'd headed the topics open up, you would have drawn a different conclusion that actually it was the unitaries that should be supervising this work. So I'm very sympathetic, and I'm quite happy that you know, officers, particularly the monitoring officers, help to keep the committee focused on where its true responsibilities need to be, and that we don't stray into matters which are properly dealt with by the unitaries.
So we have scaled back, as I said, on sort of the number of reviews that we're looking to do in that area. Obviously, in light of increasing infection rates and sort of changing restrictions with social distancing, added to the fact that North Hants for the past few months has been very close to being a top 10 hotspot for COVID, we have introduced 2 COVID-19 infection controls review, just to provide assurance as to the effectiveness of actions that the council, as a leader within the committee, is taking to protect citizens. If we just move on to, so at 4.1.8, I detail in the table audits which have come in and the audits which we've looked to take out. 4.1.9, finally, we show how the audit plan is to be resourced. This is obviously subject, committee, to just be mindful to us not being asked to do unplanned reviews or requests or any sort of major fraud or similar unplanned activities that we might have to get involved in. That might mean that some of that resource is diverted from the plan. But we are hopeful that we will keep as tight a rein as possible to ensure that the plan does get delivered. And then at 4.2 is really a detail of the key financial systems. And then I summarize outcomes from the fraud. I would just like to highlight 4.2, where good controls did operate very effectively to prevent quite a significant fraud against the council, and invoice fraud was prevented. And then the rest of the document sort of details outcomes and performance for the fraud team. And I'd like to pause there. Chair, I don't know whether you want me to take questions or whether you'd like Steve to go through the limited assurance reports.
Yeah, no, let's do questions on the plan. So Cecile, you hand up first.
So I'm sorry, but Jacinda completely lost me. You know, I read the papers, and as you said, what is important for us is to have, as a member of the audit, to have the audit signing off the audit 1918, 1919, 1919, 1920, and to give the unitary the final audit so they can go on their way with a good financial basis. Now we are on close down. What I don't, the only things, and maybe the only things that I am very happy in that old paper is, frankly, the fraud, the way we have managed fraud and so on is very good. So the audit has done his work, and that maybe we should not concentrate. If we have a system that work, that allowed the audit to see very quickly how fraud works, that is great. But otherwise, I do find, as you say, audit withdrawn, that is what is important for us. We need to sign our, Ernst & Young need to sign our audit. And that is what we should focus on. The rest, as you say, Bill, rightly, the unitary has to look at us and see what the goods they are going to take forward. But in the meantime, I don't know if my colleague feels the same, but the commentary, I was completely lost because I looked at my 4.3, 3.3, 2.3, and I just want a summary of what is important. I don't want details. I want to know we are in the right direction. The details, I hope officer will do, and they do it normally because that is why they are paid for. We are just paid to question if we are going in the right direction. Thank you, Chairman.
So what we're talking about here is actually not the subjects that you raised there. That's for later on in the agenda, because you're talking about external audit. This is really focused on internal audit, which is about giving us assurance that the processes of the council are running properly and that the internal controls are working. So this is really, I suppose you could say, to allow Duncan as the Chief Internal Auditor to give his approval when he gives his annual assessment. So we'll come back onto the external audit later on.
Sorry, the external audit cannot work well if the internal audit doesn't work well. So for me, the internal audit, and they do internal audit, Duncan and Jacinda do excellent work, but they are not good at presenting to us how good they are and where they need help. So it became a bit of a fog. I would like them to be proud of what they do well and present it to us. Instead of, for me, it becomes foggy, and I don't know if it's the same. For example, I picked up that they have done a superb job on fraud. So that is what I pick up. The rest has been foggy, but maybe I am the only one. I am out of my depth, maybe there.
Okay, any other comments or questions on the plan?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, if I can move on to page 28, 4.27, which talks about monetary values. And the second section on that, it's talking about a notional saving is recorded of £11,000. And then it says this figure is quoted from 2011 research by London Borough of Islington.
Yeah.
Why on earth would we go back 9 years for something like this?
That is the latest available research on the National Fraud website, which is why we're quoting it. Obviously, we haven't undertaken any research ourselves, but that is the most up-to-date available research in terms of notional values. So it's what's quoted nationally, and we go by that. It may well be out of date, Councillor, but that's what the government is putting out as an example for others to use in terms of notional values.
Any other comments on the plan? John?
Thank you, Chair. I thought we were using the blue hand, obviously not now. Congratulations on the financial, getting the money back, etc. Because there are some good things in here. There's no doubt about it. But it does worry me when we look at page 19 and we look at the resources given to the team and the NCC 7 full-time equivalent, etc. And I know there is a difference between us closing down and the unitaries opening up. But can I just ask, have the unitaries got any audit facilities or people that can, because they've got an interest in how we close down and how things are improving and getting better or will be in place for them. Is there no way of sharing any resources with the future unitaries?
Audit and risk is part of one of the future Northants work stream, is my understanding, and they are looking at the structure of the shared service. It will be a shared service. So my understanding is if there are resources in any of the districts or the borough councils who are joining to form the unitary, then they will transfer into the shared service. So there's a potential that we will get some resource coming into the shared service. But that is something that's still being looked at by a future Northants project.
I've just got one question in relation to the plan. You probably recollect that in Barry's very early days, he introduced a financial improvement plan. And we had a good presentation, I think, back in January, which suggested that, and indeed confirmed that actually the plan had been implemented and the work had substantially started. However, the commissioners did specifically ask the Audit Committee to monitor how the improvement plan was going. And while I don't think anything necessarily substantial is required, we should be aware of that request. And so I was going to propose that either, Duncan and Barry can talk about how best this might be achieved, either at a high level or by incorporating an element of future audits. Could we just check that all the good work that we did, back at the start of the year has actually been embedded? And I'm thinking in particular, there's some elements of detail of the plan that, are quite important, but we wouldn't necessarily see. So I think I'd like to just propose to the committee that we ask Duncan to think about how that might be done in the lightest possible way, so that we can do what the commissioners have asked us to do, which is to monitor the financial improvement plan.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we are fairly stretched at the moment, but I'll happily take the request and have a conversation with obviously Barry and the team in terms of sort of what work we can do. As you say, light touch hopefully will be sufficient, and we'll report on that.
Good. I think that's the right approach, but I don't want to be in a position where I have to say to the commissioner, sorry, we didn't quite have enough resource to do this particular request, because it's the only request actually they made of us.
Okay.
Right. Shall we move on to the limited opinion audits? Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Chair. So during the last period, we've got 3 audits which we bring to the committee in full because of the level of assurance given. I'm not intending to go through them in detail. I'm just intending to give you a high-level summary of some of the issues, as well, if possible, some good news on progress in terms of addressing some of the weaknesses. So if I start with the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations, this regulation came into effect in May 2018 and introduced several major changes to former data protection legislation, including, but not limited to, increased accountability and transparency requirements, strengthened rights for individuals in relation to their personal data, and greater penalties for breaching the requirements of legislation. This audit focused on assessing if council arrangements were consistent with the new requirements, but also assessing whether the arrangements were embedded in practice. In terms of overall arrangements, whilst we found a small number of weaknesses were found during the audit, overall there is a clearly documented overarching framework based around defined governance arrangements, a suite of policy and procedures, as well as e-learning to support council in meeting the requirements of GDPR. Furthermore, key activities supported by officers with detailed knowledge and experience of data protection and information governance. Whilst the overall framework is in place, the findings indicate a number of key areas of non-compliance with the policies and procedure. Furthermore, in some areas, insufficient records are being kept to clearly demonstrate the council's compliance with GDPR. And in particular, that was around mandatory training being completed, that all data impact assessments that were required to be completed had been completed, and that around document retention in terms of disposing of information when it's no longer needed. Like with all work, this is subject to a follow-up in terms of that, and that will start in October, where we'll make initial contact with the service to get their self-assessment on progress, and then we'll undertake some testing to validate that update. Shall I go through these one at a time, or shall I do all 3?
let's just take questions on that specific. Cecilia, you've obviously got one.
It's a very good internal audit report. Now, what I like it, but what I cannot see is the risk, the financial risk, if there is a breach. And for me, audit, it's the process, but also when you identify your risk, if you don't fix it, what is the financial impact? And that is because GDPR, as you know, can cause us a very, especially because we look after vulnerable and so on, and we have a lot of information from everyone. So it's a very good report, but I have no financial data. And that for me, I would love to see some financial data with the breach you have identified, if that will go further. Could you give me some insurance that it's minor, or if it's major, what is the amplitude? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I think the simple answer is it's unclear. The new legislation introduced up to a severe penalty for breaches. I am not aware that any of the breaches that have taken place at NCC, be it minor or even serious ones, have resulted in any financial penalties. What I can do is I can come back to you and clarify that, so I want to be clear on the facts on that. I think the reason why we don't give figures in the report regarding this is each case in terms of a breach is taken on its own merit. So no two cases are ever the same. And there are a number of factors that are considered when determining the redress in terms of this. Furthermore, because it's done by an external body, it wouldn't be right for us to guess or even suggest how they approach it, because I don't think it's as straightforward as if you do this, it results in this. But I'll go away and speak to the team and at least confirm, based on activity since GDP came in, whether we've had any financial penalties as a result.
Okay, thanks. So do you want to move on to the youth offending report? Yeah.
Key point I just want to mention around this one as a starting point is this was an unplanned audit, and this audit was requested specifically as a result of concerns raised by the then recently appointed head of service around financial administration arrangements in the service. So the audit, just for clarity, wasn't a review of the youth offending service, it was a review of the financial administration arrangements. When she contacted us, she had concerns around poor financial processes, areas of spend which, based on her experience, she hadn't seen before in youth offending, and concerns over some of the appropriateness of certain decisions and purchases. The level of assurance that we've given in terms of this audit simply reflects the fact that we've validated the concerns raised by the head of service. And in the context of that, what we found was that while spend is incurred through corporate systems like ERP Gold, Purchase Card and Petty Cash, the review found local working practices in place did not consider or take account of corporate procedures. So they developed their own procedures which didn't quite follow what was expected based on a corporate level. For areas of spend like accommodation or financial assistance, spend had been incurred without any reference to a policy or procedures to understand why we were making payments and the type of support we were given. And then we also identified high levels of non-compliance with council procedures around a number of areas, around primarily petty cash, but also we'd identified there was an issue regarding mileage, where mileage claims have been overpaid as a result of some of the poor practice. To provide some context to this, Bert, the findings are isolated to just one service, and the non-pay spend that goes through that area is approximately £170,000 per annum. So in the wider context of the wider discussions you'll be having on external audit, this is relatively minor in terms of things. The findings are significant, but it's in the context of a relatively small area spend. Since the audit was finalised in May, the service has made good progress already. They've undertaken an exercise to review officers with permissions to approve spend. And as a result of that, they've refocused this on a smaller number of senior officers in the service who can approve spend. All local procedures have been reviewed to ensure they're consistent with the council financial procedures, and that's also involved the communication of the new arrangements. In terms of specific areas of spend, in terms of accommodation, payments to accommodation providers have stopped except for one case which is currently being reviewed. And even in that case, that arrangement has now been formalised and is managed through a much more formal process involving invoices rather than receiving cash payments. In terms of financial assistance, it's been agreed that the service will not routinely provide such payments. And in the event of an emergency, spend incurred will require senior management approval. And then in terms of the mileage overpayments, these are all being recovered currently through the payroll, through ongoing deductions through payroll. Just also to confirm to the committee, we're currently actually doing the follow-up audit as we speak. One of my team was on site last week, and at the moment I'm getting very positive signals that what we've been informed by the service is started to be embedded in practice. The only concern I will share with the committee is that because of lockdown, a lot of spend in these areas is reduced. So there doesn't seem to be that much activity on which is to test new arrangements. But when that's finished, we'll bring an update to the audit committee. So at that point, I'll take any questions.
Any questions or comments on this one?
It's a very good, sorry, it's a very good report, but there again, you know, when our finances are so stretched, as Stephen said, it has a very limited impact. It's a process that was so wrong. And what is important is that what you have learned of that process, we can have that spread on other, not just the youth offending, but we make sure that all other associations who work with the county council follow the same rules. So for us, it's more as a county and to follow the strict rule of asking for payment or whatsoever. So it's a good example of a minor things, and it should be spread all over the NCC, because otherwise it's a very hard piece of work for a very limited gain in terms of financial.
Okay, thank you. So Stephen, do you want to just move on to the Children's First Complaints report, which I think is probably the most significant, at least for me, of these three reports?
Okay, so a corporate audit of complaints was undertaken and considered by the Audit Committee back in September 2018. As a result of that review, it was decided that a review of directorate arrangements would be undertaken, including those in Children's First. The report was initially issued in December 2019, although further work has been undertaken recently to validate some of the findings, conclusions reached in the initial report. The report that has been presented to you today incorporates the findings from the recent work. So in terms of the arrangements, these are underpinned by clearly documented procedures around how to deal with complaints. However, the review has identified a perceived disconnect between the council's and statutory turnaround targets for responding to complaints. Despite that, the main issue we found is that whilst testing is indicating that the direction of travel is an improving one, the levels of non-compliance in providing timely responses are still at a high level. We're pleased to report that of the 9 actions that were made in this report, the update report indicates that 5 have already been implemented. And of course, we'll be following the remaining actions in due course. I think from an audit perspective on this one, the challenge for me, just so to give a perspective on this for members, is that the timescales given to respond to complaints are generally reasonable. So in this case, it's 10, 20 days. The challenge is generally is whether the people who are doing those complaints can do the work as part of their day job and do all the other things within that time. So the fact that we don't achieve the targets doesn't mean that they're not taken seriously, but just in the current, in the current discussions that we've had today about all the things that are happening within NCC, fitting in, responding to these as well as the day business and dealing with the COVID-19 implications, etc. There's always likely to be some elements of non-compliance. The key from our perspective, Bert, is to make sure that there's an ongoing dialogue with the customer to make them aware of any delays and why that's the case. At that point, I'm happy to take questions, or no, Jacinta will jump in on this one because she was more heavily involved in this audit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cecile?
Yes, when I was speaking of plain English, I will. If you take page 81, at the end, the update June 20, and you can all read it. And now, can I have an explanation? I think what you are saying, we are going to have a good spreadsheet that will reply. Because for me, that is a sort of gobbledygook language that doesn't make life. And it's so sad because it's a good report, but sometimes you lose me, and I don't like to read. I am, I find those reports sometimes you have pocket of excellence, and after you go on a little tangent, and I cannot understand. So that is an example of I don't like. But also with the audit you did, what is a recommendation? Because Stephen, you say something quite important. You don't know if they don't take the complaint seriously or it's because of the day job. They are fundamental, those complaints, because if they are not dealt, and some were asked by our MP and so on. So if they are not taken, are you proposing that we have a team of officers that are just for those complaints? Because the risk for the organization is major, and maybe after it will go with the Children Trust, I don't know. But for me, what you said was the most important things. You do not know if it's a question of capacity for the officers or if it's a question that we should have another system. So what are the conclusions that the leadership team has? Because children are not an option. That is a statutory duty, and we are all corporate parents. And the cost of children or of us not doing the complaint, and if there is a major risk, will be of reputation and also a monetary. So can you tell us what was implemented after your audit? Thank you.
So just before you answer that, Steve, it's probably worth, in your defence of the alleged gobbledygook in the report, it's fair to comment that these reports are actually done for the recipients in management, and if you think some of it's gobbledygook, that's okay, so long as people in management understand it. I think
I'm sorry, if I don't understand, I don't think people understand it. You know, I think it's very important. We have signed to the Charter of Plain English. And I do think, you know, the officers are under stress. They work very hard. If the language is not clear, it's more difficult for them to do the job well. That is my point. It's in the minutiae that we, you know, if you do little things right, the big things look after themselves. And that is an example. That's all.
Edwina, you want to make a comment? You maybe should just introduce yourself, as this is the first time you've spoken to the committee. And you're probably still on mute.
Sorry, Chair, we're just working with Edwina just to try and work out
Okay.
how to get her off. So if you can bear with us just 1 second, please.
Yeah, shall I ask my questions while we're waiting?
Yes, John, because you're you've only got 10 minutes. So,
Chair, I think this is a good report actually, and I'm pleased that it came in front of us, because I have went through this process with parents many a time and found it very, very frustrating, unfortunately. and it's hard to get a real feel for the outcome of this, given that it's
Sorry, I'm just
internal.
doing it again.
It's internal, and we haven't really spoken to actual customers who have went through that process, because, you know, I have phone calls with parents who are extremely upset of this process, unfortunately. So I'm pleased that it's there, and I really want to see the recommendations implemented. I am worried as we move on to Children's Trust of how we keep a hold of that, especially as members, ensuring that it's put in place and we can scrutinise or at least find out what's happening about it. But I'm pleased with it, and I'll be glad to see when all the recommendations are implemented. Thank you, Chair.
Edwina, are you online with us now?
I think I am.
Yes, you
Can
are.
everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Apologies, I've had difficulties with technology today, so I do apologise. I've had to log in with my phone and my computer as well. I just wanted to make a comment to Councillor Irvine Smith that perhaps, because it is within her remit to perhaps write to any of the officers before the meetings if there is anything that she needs clarification on, and that way she then has anything that she's unsure about would have been dealt with before the meeting. I just thought to make the comment if that makes things easier for her.
Okay, thank you for that offer.
Sorry, Bill. I am a councillor who has of his experience. Our meeting, I think it's very important that we all discuss at committee. And as you know, I do have asked some questions, but at the moment with COVID-19, and I had a lot of problem with my IT, and I have bothered enough the democratic services for that. So I think the question I have asked are in the round. They are not specific to officer, and they come after the explanation of Mr. Mangus. Thank you.
I think if the Chief Executive were here, she would probably have something to say on this report, because I know, and she said it to the committee, that complaints are dear to her heart. As she's not here, Barry, I wonder whether as a sort of representative of the leadership team, this is kind of just a nod, I guess I'm asking you to give, which is, you know, just assure us that this is getting the right level of attention at leadership team level.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's safe to say that leadership team have read the report and are concerned about some of the issues raised in there. I think key for us going forward is to make sure that it's wrapped up in the improvement plan for the Children's Trust, and that we have specific KPIs within the performance mechanism of the trust as well, so we can monitor the handling of complaints as a performance issue.
Okay, thank you. Now, I just have one point of detail, which is really a question for Edwina. In paragraphs 814 and 815, it implies that we've decided that we're not going to submit a report which appears to be a statutory requirement. And while that might be the appropriate and correct decision, I just want to be sure that that's been approved by legal services and hasn't just been taken sort of arbitrarily by some member of the children's services. So are you able to assure us on that now, or do you want to just go away and check on it?
Yes, I can respond to that. Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is a statutory requirement. The 2009 regulations require us to produce an annual report and to make it available to anyone who asks to see it. And I did speak to the complaints manager yesterday to find out what had happened with this 2017-2018 report. And she had said to me that, to her knowledge, no one has made a decision that the report should not be produced. She's in the process of producing it, and she's made a commitment to finish it by the 5th of October, at which stage it would come before the leadership team and go to Cabinet in mid-October. So the short answer to that is it's not been signed off by legal services, but a report shouldn't be produced. A report is in the process of being produced, and at some stage will be brought back to this committee.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for the clarity. Any other comments or questions on the internal audit update report?
Just a general point, and you'll love this one, Chairman, on the last issue. You'll be delighted to know that I am the life president of the Intercompany Complaints Association, which was set up in the 1990s and has something like 150 food and drink manufacturers in it, mainly dealing with general complaints, but fraudulent complaints as well. So if they need any help, I'm quite happy to sit down and talk to them.
Very good. So we need to agree to note the report. So Barbara, would you like to just do the roll call for us?
I will certainly, Chair. Councillor Irvine Swift.
We note the report, and also we might want to thank officers who have worked with that. And the report were very clear. I mean, I would like to thank that and record, despite my outrage at few things. But I think it's very important that we have those discussions amongst ourselves to make sure that officers know and we both can improve. That is a process. Thank you.
Welcome. We'll make sure that's recorded in the minutes for you. Councillor John McGee.
Agreed.
Councillor Steve Osborne.
Agreed.
And Councillor Bill Parker.
Agreed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good. So we'll move on to the Ernst & Young progress report. And John, presumably at this point, you're probably going to leave us. Debbie, are you going to talk to this?
I think Bill Steve should be on the call. I think unfortunately he's had to dial on his mobile, and so his name may not be showing. So I think he'll take you through the first bit, and then I will update you on the pension fund.
Okay.
Assuming he's managed to dial on okay. I think he's had some technology problems this morning.
Are you there, Steve, somewhere?
If not, I will take you through the report. Okay.
Yeah, I think you better start, Debbie.
Yeah,
and
I'll start.
Shout if he turns up.
I will. I'll start at the end of the report if that's okay, in case Steve manages to get on. So I will give you an update on the pensions status.
I think he is, sorry to interrupt, I think he is here. He's just muted. I'm going to try and unmute him.
Okay.
Here.
Well, that'd be good because it's always good to start at the beginning, isn't it?
It is better, ideally.
It doesn't appear to be working, so apologies. We may need to continue as planned.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Ah, yes, we can.
You can. A disembodied voice.
Right. Yeah. Debbie, do you want to carry on with the pensions first, and then I'll come in with the financial statement?
I can do, probably because that's just a little quicker. So if we deal with that first. So in this report, we provided an update on both the 2018-19 pension fund audit as well as 2019-20. The committee members may remember that the last committee that I presented to on the pension fund, we noted that we'd substantially completed the audit and were expecting to be issuing our audit report. Subsequent to that, we have now concluded all of our work on the pension fund and have not identified any issues. The accounts were well prepared and the supporting working papers were of good quality. However, as part of the pension fund accounts, the pension fund accounts form part of the Northamptonshire County Council accounts and actually refer to other information within those overall accounts, and therefore we're not actually able to issue our audit report until we've concluded the 2018-19 audit of the County Council. I think that was the same position that KPMG reached, which is why there was a delay in issuing the 17-18 pension fund opinion. Therefore, we're in effect holding that audit report until we're in a position to issue that alongside the County Council opinion. Although we haven't been able to issue the actual final audit report, we have been able to move on and start the 1920 audit. We've made good progress on that audit. And the reason we've started that is obviously that will enable us to provide the IS19 assurances that we need to the other Northamptonshire bodies so that they can actually conclude their 1920 audits, which is an important element. The audit is making good progress. There is additional work that we're having to undertake in 1920 for all pension funds, and this is due to the fact that there's a triennial valuation taking place. That means that we have to validate the membership data that forms the basis of the inputs to the actuarial triennial valuation. That is quite a lot of additional work, and that work is ongoing at the moment. In addition to that, there's an impact of COVID-19 on pension funds this year, and that's in relation to the additional risk around level 3 or hard to value investments. Those investments may comprise pooled property investments, private equity funds, and they are generally harder to get a 31st of March valuation for. There's a higher degree of estimation, and that's been particularly impacted this year by COVID-19 and market volatility around that date. So we're also having to undertake additional procedures to identify that risk. I wasn't going to say any more on the pension fund audit. As I said, it is progressing, but there are obviously 2 additional areas of audit work that we're undertaking for 1920, which obviously are taking more time from both the pension fund to provide us with information and from our audit team to progress those items.
So I've just got one question for you, Debbie, specifically in relation to the delay on the 1819 accounts, which I guess we hadn't anticipated until we got these papers. Are there any legal issues that causes? Are there any timetables that we need to adhere to in relation to the pension scheme accounts, which we will get into difficulties with because of the delay?
I'm not aware of any, but that doesn't mean to say there are. That's probably something that we'll pick up with the pension fund, if that's okay, Bill. We will go back and just confirm if there's anything they need to do. But it's obviously that was the same position you were in 1718, so that will be the same issue as previously. So there's no change in relation to 1819 from that previous position. But I will pick that up actually with the pension fund, just in case there's any reporting they need to do to confirm why they haven't published their accounts.
Okay, thank you. So Steve's going to go back to the beginning, all being well.
I think yes, hopefully.
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. So here we are. I shall. There we go. That's better. Okay. Can I just check you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
I can certainly hear you, yeah.
Okay, that's great. Okay. So what we've done here is we've just produced a short paper which summarises the progress in terms of where we are on the audit. I don't propose to go through all of those areas in detail, because I think there's quite a few there, and I'll probably just wait for questions given the timing of the meeting. But as committee members will know, we took a pause over the period. The council has reinvigorated its team that it's using to undertake the financial statements audit. We've seen really significant progress in terms of the quality of the working papers that we're getting through, and we're working very closely with Debbie and Barry and their teams to crack through the audit work as quick as we can. We've been back on site for the whole of September. We list below kind of the status of where the key areas of the audit are. I think the summary of that is there is a lot in progress and a lot of material areas in progress. And therefore there's not a lot I can say in absolute formal conclusion, but you know, we're a lot further on than we were just before we had the summer break. That's primarily on the financial statements areas. There's also the work in respect of value for money, which we're looking at in terms of our assessment. I mean, at one level, as the year is long gone and done and dusted, we would hope that we can get that concluded fairly quickly. We continue to work remotely with, as we do with all of our audits at the moment, and particularly given the current circumstances and this week's announcements, I would expect that remote working will continue in place, frankly, up until the completion of up to the 2021 audit, to be perfectly honest, the way that it's panning out. But we're working well with the council members despite that remote working. I think some of the challenges that we have on both sides is we've got very large sample sizes just because of the nature of our materiality. We are trying to re-review our approach to that and see if there's anything we can do to reduce that. At the moment, that's the very large numbers are the ones that are popping out due to our methodology, but we're going to go back to the loop and see if we can actually reduce those. We're still complying with our audit methodology. Clearly, as time moves on with these types of audits, you know, staff and personnel change, and then some of the questions that we're asking relate to data that's held on old and legacy systems, and that's proving, I think, challenging for the council to be able to both access and then understand that type of information. That was always going to be the case, to be perfectly honest. It's always the case. We also are looking with a plan to move straight onto 1920 as well, and then obviously onto 2021. But I think that's the key. Those are the key messages. From a team perspective, we've got our team on site and they're booked in pretty much to run all the way through to March. That covers the 1920 audit as well. We have our senior manager, Carol Ryan, is going to leave us in November. Barry and will be aware of that. What we've done is we have replaced Carol with a very experienced senior manager called David Wrigler, who's got a lot of experience both on counties and unitaries. And we've also supplemented that senior manager role with another manager, again, an experienced manager called Dan Spiller. So we've enhanced our top team as well as myself and Debbie. And I think I'll kind of pause there as a summary and take any questions, if that's okay.
I think, Steve, maybe just one additional point to make regarding the value for money conclusion section.
Yeah.
There was a question earlier in the meeting regarding risk management arrangements. So members will note that we're reviewing the council's risk management arrangements as part of our value for money conclusions. So we'll obviously provide commentary on our assessment of the adequacy of those arrangements as part of that. And also because of the timing of our work, we're in effect running the work that we're doing on 1819 concurrently with our 1920 value for money conclusion assessment. A lot of those issues will continue in the current year. So to be more efficient, we're trying to basically do 2 years work within one assessment, but obviously provide separate reporting within the audit results report on those 2 years.
Bill, you're muted.
I was going to say, Bill's on mute.
Thank you. I was bound to do it at some point. So, Bill, I see you've got your hand up, but just before we come to you, I just invite Barry to make a couple of comments about what he's done with his team to respond to the challenges of the audit, which I think it would be useful and reassuring for the committee to hear about.
Thank you, Chair, and I would echo everything that Steve said there. And in terms of the Northamptonshire County Council team, what we've done is get a very experienced interim ex-director of finance, and who's taken over the assistant director role in that area, and she brings with it a lot of experience and a lot of attention to detail and grip that's needed in this particular area. We've also brought in a very experienced chief accountant, Jean Stevenson, who is an addition to the team and generally bolstered the team with extra resource both internally and externally as well. So we've taken that 3-month, 4-month break over the summer period to bring that sort of expertise in and get those people up to speed, because I think organisational memory is a key risk area within this particular audit. We're talking about nearly 2 years ago now. People have moved on. People have need to be reminded of what they've done and where that lies. And I think because of that, what I've asked the team to do is prioritise the 1819 audit as the top priority for the next month and a half, because there's a lot going on, and it would be easy to drop the 1819 audit and move on to other things which probably are a bit more exciting than the 1819 audits, but it still needs to be done. It's not going to go away. So I've asked the team to focus resolutely on resolving that. I think I would just add at the end that you know, obviously Carol's leaving us, and she's been a great help to us, and we'd like to wish Carol all the best in her future career.
Thank you, Barry. Bill, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There were 3 points I wanted to raise. The first one is on page 15, and I think Debbie may actually have already alluded to this, which is the valuation of the pension fund. So I won't ask her to answer that one because we've already talked about that. But on the next page, page 16, right at the top, it talks about the minimum revenue provision, and the next one down is the fire authority transfer. And I'm just concerned why these issues should be being raised now, because clearly if there are any issues or problems with these going back several years now, and minimum revenue provision obviously has been used for many, many years, I'm just concerned that our previous auditors didn't pick the issues up. So can you just explain what the two are, particularly the minimum revenue provision, and what the implications there are, please?
Steve?
Yes, so I'll start, Debbie, and you can add in. So this is a change in how the authority has a policy change in how it's chose to calculate the minimum revenue provision. They are able under the CIFA code to change that policy, and a lot of authorities have. Principally, it gives a financial benefit to the authority, putting it fairly bluntly. That's the reason for doing it. It is quite technical, and it requires data to be found which goes back several years, which is one of the challenges in supporting the revised calculation. So it's principally as a result of the basis of which the authority has undertaken the calculation that we need to get under the skin of that.
So, sorry, Chairman, can I just ask, when did this happen then? When did the policy change come about?
It's come in, I think, Debbie, it's come in for the 18-19 year in effect.
Right, okay. Okay, thank you.
Cecil?
Sorry, there was a sorry, I didn't answer the question really, the fire authority transfer. I think it's the actual accounting for the fire authority transfer in 18-19. That's why it's in this year.
Right, okay, I understand. Okay, all right, thank you.
Cecil?
Yes, sorry if it shows my ignorance. I have two things in income and expenditure. Note 3, the council had disclosed 601 million in other service expenses and 120 million of fees charged of other services, and you go on a long explanation. Can you elaborate for me, because I don't really understand what it really means there. Also, the payroll is one of our big expenses. Are you now satisfied that we know exactly, because you are referring on 17-18, that now we are in control of our payroll? And finally, value for money conclusion. What I am concerned about is that your risk assessment is significant for basically all our services. So when do you think you can give us an unqualified? Because I think now for officers to be able to close down the account when we finish, I think it will be helpful for everybody and for us, councillor, to have the account signed and the audited, because until they're audited, rumor can circulate. So can I have some insurance and explanation from you? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So the income and expenditure line, but what we're saying there is that there's a big amount of cash tagged as other service expenses, and there's a large amount of balances of other fees and charges. There's a lot of work that we need to undertake to be able to be satisfied that those balances are complete and accurate. They're quite complex in the sense that the way the transactions work, you've got to drill right down to a transaction level, and there are many, many thousands, well, probably hundreds of thousands of transactions that make up those balances. And therefore, frankly, there's just a lot of work to get through in huge, big sample sizes. That's pretty much what that's saying. Sorry, your next question. I can remember the payroll. So the payroll point is that work continues to be ongoing. We're not yet. We haven't yet completed that work. We know that there were challenges in respect of being able to confirm the actual full-time equivalents of 1718, which is key to be able to prove that payroll figure. And our work on that continues. Debbie, do you have any more detail on that at all, on that particular point?
No, that's still ongoing as far as I'm aware, because we only drafted this report, I think, last week. So
yeah, exactly.
That hasn't yet been concluded.
Okay, and in respect to the value for money conclusion, just to remind committee members, the value for money conclusion has to be from the 1st of April 2018 to the 31st of March 2019. It is a very binary period of time that assessment is made. And you're quite right, Cecile, that the world has moved on significantly from that period of time. But we can only make the assessment in relation to that 18-19 year. We will come on to 1920 and 2021 going forward. Clearly, the very significant risk areas that we identify there won't be a surprise to you, and without concluding before we've done all of the work, it wouldn't surprise you if conclusion was not hugely dissimilar to the 1718 conclusion either, just because this is at a period of time which is now, you know, we're 18 months further on down the line from when this period finished. When we do 1920 and 2021, we will consider those areas again, and I expect that we will have progress in respect of those value for money conclusions, whether or not they're clean and not modified in any way is a slightly different matter, but I can certainly see that we would expect that there is progress rather than what in effect was an adverse conclusion in 1718, and, you know, again, without prejudicing where I might end up, probably in that direction for 1819 as well.
Just a thing, before Barry will come, but I would like to thank you for this explanation. Now, I come back to the income and expenditure. You say it's a lot of work, and I don't doubt about it, and Barry might agree too, but do you have any concern? Because if the work is important, what is more important? Do you have any concern, or is just a routine work and you have no concern about the way we spend our balance? Because that is what, as a committee, I am concerned about. If our officers have done their job well, the balance are big, but you should not have too many concerns. Could you expand on that, please?
Okay, well, I'm not able to conclude because we haven't got there. We're really at a place where we're working through that work at the moment and trying to understand it. It has been very challenging in the start off, and part of the reason that it was difficult to progress the audit any pace sooner was just getting to the transaction level was quite difficult because of the data that was there. The way the balances are made up are often made up of several transactions, and we need to drill down to the actual individual transaction level to be able to test it. There are a number of areas that we are considering, and previously this was an area of focus for other auditors, particularly in respect of Section 106 grants, and I know that's slightly different to the fees and charges, but and the use of the capitalisation directive under transformation, actually in that particular area, because the council in effect has got very limited expenditure that it is tagging as transformation expenditure, that will not be the issue that it was for the previous auditors.
Barry, you wanted to make a comment, I think?
I think, Chair, just to unpack the payroll issue, not because it's an issue, but to give the committee some understanding of the complexity that we're dealing with here, because it really is a microcosm of some of the issues that we're coming across. So normally the analytical review of payroll will be relatively straightforward. You compare the number of employees from one year to the next year, but Northamptonshire being Northamptonshire, we decided to replace our financial system. So we're looking at 2 different payroll systems. For a start, and during that year we transferred fire out and brought in some of our in-house companies as well, OCS, NAS, and a lot of our externalized companies were brought in as part of the improvement plan to address the financial issues. Now what that means is there's been massive swings in the number of employees, both inwards and outwards in the council in that given year. And just to add a bit of further complexity, the way that KPMG analysed this is entirely different the way that EY analysed this. That's not a criticism, that's just a matter of fact. So when we switched to full-time equivalents, it introduces extra complexity because of the way that we record and monitor casual staff in particular, and because obviously converting those casual staff to a full-time equivalent basis when they haven't got a fixed number of hours is difficult. It's not impossible, it's a complex piece of work and we will get there, but just to give the committee an understanding of what seems relatively straightforward and has been in previous years actually becomes a very complex issue this year.
Can I just ask a question on going concern? Now, it's probably a little bit tedious for other members of the committee, and I don't particularly, I'm not asking necessarily how you're going to satisfy yourself about going concern, but of course, normally you would do that by looking at a medium-term financial plan. We won't have that. Also, you've got issues of COVID funding and all the rest of it. Yeah. All I really want is some sort of assurance that you've figured out how you're going to get yourselves over the line, because what I don't really want to be in a position, say in December, where we've got everything agreed and then we've just got technical problems getting the going concern issue over the line, because it all, you know, wherever you go, where this crops up, it's always something that catches you out at the last minute. So that's really
what I'll tell us. It's a very relevant and fair question, Chairman. So as this authority ceases to exist on 31st, clearly the going concern assessment is technically from a year from the point of that we sign the accounts. Okay, so that's well beyond the point at which this authority ceases to exist. However, under, and Debbie will quote, I'm sure, the legislation, under the basis for public sector going concern assessment is that whilst the authority ceases to exist, the statutory responsibilities and services of the authority continues, and therefore the accounts are based on a going concern basis because those services will continue, because most of them are in statute. Where we get to is the COVID issue is a little more complex this year, and the one positive thing about being slightly later with this audit is that we will have gone through this process with many other authorities as well, because it's the same issue. So the point of debate that we get to is principally, and I'll use this as an example, as a stark contrast. If you were a district council with lots of balances and not a lot of complexity and not a lot of COVID reliant funding, it's very possible you may end up with the going concern is fine. There's no mention of what we term as an emphasis of matter because of the nature of COVID. where you get to more complex organisations and the larger unitaries of counties, and I would class this as one of these, I expect that we will have some form of emphasis of matter statement in relation to the going concern basis, just because of the nature of things like COVID funding, etc. And the uncertainty that exists at the moment in the sector about how much you might get funded for it versus how much you might have to find yourselves. That's not an issue around this. That's got nothing really to do with the fact that you disappear on the 31st of March. It's the same issue that we're dealing with for all of our authorities. And the way that we assess that is then about the amount of funding that you've got, the risk that appears to be, and also the adequacy of the disclosures that you'll need to make, which frankly will be the same in your 18-19 statement and practically your 19-20 statement as well. Chairman, does that answer your question? Sorry if that's a slightly technical answer, but there's not a lot I can do to it.
So what I'm hearing is that we might have a sort of technical emphasis of matter in relation to the COVID funding.
Correct.
But you're telling me that assessment of going concern is not something that's going to impede the timetable?
No, and wait, okay. It's not that it won't impede it in the sense that we need to do it and therefore are planning for it. The issue with the timing of it is that it has to be done as close to the point that we sign as possible. But frankly, we know what the assessment is going to be because it's the base of the assessment, because you cease on the 31st of March. We have to go through we will have to go through an internal consultation process, as we are having to do for all of our larger local authorities, and that's or even larger organisations as EY, so that there is a period of elapsed time it will take to get through that consultation process, but we know that and can plan on that basis. So it shouldn't be something that pops up at the last minute. And I appreciate where there was the debate in last year's signing off. Clearly, things like the capitalisation directive, etc., are already in place now, and known and all of that stuff. So there shouldn't really be any moving parts out with the COVID issue that are going to spring up that we don't know about. Good.
Any other questions there? So I think what I'm hearing here is that the pause that we took in the early summer has been highly beneficial for both sides. The audit is now going well. It's adequately resourced again on both sides. Yeah. It's challenging for all the reasons that have been outlined, and quite a few others that we could also mention. But overall, we still think we're going to be signing the accounts off in December, and those for the following year will be signed off before we trip over the cliff at the end of March.
Yeah, that's still the plan.
And also, just the same question that we asked in relation to the pension fund, if you could just confirm either now or later that the timing of the completion of the audit of these various accounts is not going to cause us any regulatory difficulty.
No, there's no regulatory difficulty that would pop up that I'm aware of. There's nothing else that's there. It's in statute for when the new authority ticks over, and there's no regulatory issue that I can see. I mean, nearly all local authority accounts for this year have been pushed back pretty much. And we're doing 18-19 now. We'll move straight on to 19-20, and then in effect go straight to 2021 as well.
Good. Okay, so we need to note that report. So Barbara, if you'd like to do the honours for us again, I'll be grateful.
Certainly. Councillor Irving Swift.
Yes, before I note the report, Bill, you asked a question of going concerns. So according to the auditor, that is not really a point that we should concern ourselves. It's because the explanation wasn't that clear for me. So providing we are happy with going concern, I would be very happy to know the report. Otherwise, I will put a little question mark. Thank you.
I think, just to paraphrase what Steve was saying, is obviously going concern is a crucial judgment because that forms the basis of the accounting. However, what he's telling us is that he'll review it in December at a minute to midnight when he's signing the accounts. And at this stage, he doesn't anticipate any problem with forming the conclusion, although he's not telling us what the conclusion will be.
With that understanding, and thank you for that clarification, you are a very good chairman. I am happy to know the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll move on to Councillor Osborne, please.
Agreed.
And Councillor Parker.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. So we're now going to move on to item 9, which is responding to a request from the auditors to describe the very limited role that we have in relation to the management of the pension scheme. So Barry, would you like to just talk to this item for us, please?
Thank you, Chair. I recognise that this will be déjà vu for committee members because it's not long since we signed the previous year's version of this. So there are 2 requirements from the external auditor. One is to sign off my oversight of the pension fund assurance, which I have done by a separate letter. And then there's this, which is the assurance for those charged with governments and their oversight of the pension accounts. The response is very, very similar to the last response. It sets out the role of the Audit Committee and how it oversees the work done to produce the pension fund accounts. The questions are, like I say, fairly self-explanatory. The answers are fairly brief and seem to make sense. So I'll hand it over to the Audit Committee if you have any questions on this response. And if there's any amendments needed, we need to get them done as soon as possible so we can sign the letter and send it back to the external auditor.
Any questions on this? I mean, Bill, you're in a slightly unusual position because you're a member of the pension scheme and of the Audit Committee. So I guess in particular in relation to, if there have been any matters of fraud that you know about with your pension hat on that we don't know about with the with our audit hats on, I suppose now is the time to mention it. But I'm certainly not aware of anything of that sort. So if you're content, I guess.
Yeah, I'm certainly not aware of anything like that, Chairman.
Good. So that's excellent. So again, we need to, are we noting this or are we approving the issue of the letters? Just remind me, Barbara.
We are not. The Audit Committee will be asked to approve its formal confirmation to the external auditors of the arrangements for its oversight of the specific management processes for the pension fund within the council for 2019-2020.
Perfect. So, Cecilia, you got a question?
I want total clarification. We are just responsible for the setting the rule of the management, and the pension committee is responsible for signing the account. So we have no input on the pension at all because I'm not involved, and I just see it in front of me when it comes as a matter of audit. So I don't want to be, for me, it's an area of expertise I know nothing about, and I know nothing about a lot of things. But what I want to make sure is that we know the report, and but we have nothing to do with the pension. When it's audited and it's said, okay, it's audited, we noted and we audit, but we agree, but I don't want to have anything, if that was possible, with the pension fund. Is that possible for me as a member of the audit committee?
So in simple terms, and Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, our role is to approve the accounts of the pension scheme. And in approving the accounts, we have to be aware of issues of fraud and so on and so forth. We have no responsibility or accountability for the management of the pension scheme, such as making investment decisions. And the auditors have asked the question in a particular way. And so the response is designed to identify and limit precisely what our role is. So I think you should be assured. Is that fair, Barry? Good. So I think with that, we'll take that as a yes. Maybe you'd like to carry on.
Yes, thank you. I note and accept. I like to have no responsibility.
Excellent. If I may, I'll continue with Councillor Osborne.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Parker, please.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Good. So that gets us to our final item, which Duncan's still here. Duncan, you want to talk about the audit charter and put it in the context of the existing audit charter that we probably have all forgotten that we've got?
I think Jacinta's presenting this as well.
Okay, right,
Chair,
so
I am still here and available to answer any questions, but
so
Jacinta's prepped with an introduction.
I'm more than happy for Jacinta to talk about it.
Thank you, Duncan. The charter obviously defines our purpose and clarifies our responsibilities. Best practice does say we need to sort of bring it to committee every so often. So we are bringing the charter to committee as a housekeeping exercise following a review that we've done. There has not been any significant changes. Well, there hasn't been any changes to the core principles of the public sector internal audit standards, but we have made some changes between the last version that went in November 2017 and the one that we're presenting here, primarily at section 2.3, where there's been some wording changing, really to expand so we can better align those principles to actual processes as opposed to kind of the theory. So it's more semantic change rather than any changes in the core principle. I would say the audit section has been working to the public sector internal audit standards, given that the rest of the document doesn't show any changes. That's as much as I'm going to say. If there are any questions.
Questions or comments, Cecile?
Comments.
So no, just comment, because we produce that and there is two things. 3.6. I'm sure that you or Duncan will alert us if you feel, because as you know, you are under a lot of pressure, so you might be between the rock and the hard place, or whatever they say in English. So 3.6 I think is very important, and also 4.5. If that could be again, and I'm sure Barry will agree with those 2 points. Otherwise, I am very happy with that document. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. So we need to note and approve the report. So Barbara, if you'd like to just do the roll call for us, please.
Certainly. Councillor Irvine Swift.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Parker.
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Good. So that gets us to the end of the agenda. Just 2 points in closing. One is I note our next meeting is in November, and the following one's in January. Now, we have been talking about approving accounts in December. So if Democratic Services could, in conjunction with Barry and EMY, look at a date that we could put in the diary for December to approve the accounts. I think that would be helpful. And the second point in closing is, again, just to thank Barbel for her tremendous work for the committee and her good humour. I've been noticing that Sophia's had her head down all the way through, so I think she's going to be a great servant in future, so that's good. So I think at this point I can declare the meeting closed.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Barbel.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Barbel. You've been great over the years and you make lovely cakes.